Katerina Jakob, long before she took that name, was organizing workers in Hamburg just the same. Organizing beneath the flag of deepest red, a new dawn of peace and freedom clearly shining in her head. Katerina Jakob first was sent to jail when the trappings of democracy all began to fail. She was frequently arrested in and out of custody while her first husband was in hiding from the Nazis. Katerina Jakob was acquitted of a crime, but the Gestapo had the last word and they weren't finished with her this time. She was sent to Ravensbrück, a killing hunger at her side. She heard of the execution, how her second husband died. For Katerina Jakob, the end was close at hand. She was on a death march with a ragged, starving band, marching through a forest, being led by the SS. What would happen hours later seemed impossible to guess. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob thought about her children and the friends and comrades taking care of them, not knowing yet if any of them survived, not knowing that soon she'd see her daughters both alive. Katerina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee, streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them, she thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies as never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review for Monday, November 16th, 2020. At least that's when we're taping. This one is subtitled "A Desperate American Empire Doubles Down on neoliberalism, neocolonialism, and global tyranny. This is Chris Driscoll, that's me, one of your two co-hosts. The other is here with me, Rainer Shea. Hello, Rainer, how are you?
Hello, I can see you got some inspiration for what to talk about from what I've been writing about. I've certainly had lots of reactions from Biden's victory. I can tell he'll be even worse than Obama, and in some ways worse than Trump. I mean, he'll kind of be worse than Trump by default because every president this century is worse than the last.
Yeah.
By necessity of the conditions of capitalism and empire.
Yes, and I, as always, I take a lot of influence, a lot of suggestions, so to speak, from your writing during the week when I don't get to talk to you as much. So that's one of the ways I keep in touch with you, keep up with what you are doing. So the first topic of the night, Biden's transition team is filled with war profiteers, Beltway chickenhawks, and corporate consultants. Now, this comes from a, let me get it up here, comes from a, let's see if I can get it over in the right place, comes from a an article on the Gray Zone, which is one of my favorites. I know you read the Gray Zone too. This one's from Kevin Gazdola from November 14th. Go to thegrayzone.com, I think it is, thegrayzone.com, the URL, and look for Biden's transition team is filled with war profiteers, Beltway chickenhawks, and corporate consultants. And it's a pretty good article. I sometimes disagree with Kevin Gazdola. I don't really always agree with him, but maybe now that he is working with some really top-notch people, the people who are in the collective of the Gray Zone, that'll improve his point of view. Anyway, this article, he goes into the kinds of people that Biden has already appointed to his transition team. It's just quite phenomenal, actually. Prime example, he says, of the interventionist-minded, establishment-oriented figures filling the Biden-Harris Defense Department agency team is Lisa Sawyer. She served as the director for NATO and European Strategic Affairs for the National Security Council from 2014 to 2015 and worked for Wall Street's J.P. Morgan Chase as a foreign policy advisor. Sawyer was part of the Center for a New American Securities Task Force on the future of U.S. coercive statecraft. Get that. That's pretty descriptive, isn't it? U.S. coercive economic statecraft. I guess that's another word for the acts of war that they do, that they normally call sanctions or economic sabotage. Both, the United States does plenty of both. This article goes on and on. U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Linda Thomas Greenfield, was appointed leader of the Biden-Harris State Department team. She is a stalwart ally of former U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice. And we've heard that name recently. Susan Rice has been much mentioned as the possible Secretary of State in the Biden-Harris regime. This thing just goes on and on. I mean, it's like a who's who of the Democrat Party and Republican Party criminals in Washington, really. I mean, the list of the worst swamp creatures, if you want to look at it that way, it's quite incredible. So just wondering, Rainer, what are your thoughts on the indications for the Biden cabinet, possible Biden cabinet once he becomes president, which I think is pretty well assured by now, even though he has not yet been declared president by any officials, because they're still counting votes. As always, it usually takes 2 to 3 weeks to count votes, but people expect instant gratification because the networks come out all the time saying, "Oh, we've got a winner, even though, you know, the official count is not over and takes weeks to do. So anyway, just wondering what your thoughts are, Rainer.
Today I saw a video from this Trump supporter guy who has this survivalist YouTube channel, and I've been getting into survivalism stuff. So I came across him, not for his politics, obviously, but he was ranting about how there's these creeping tyrannies from the government, and how they're waging psychological warfare against us to enact censorship and to carry out all these nefarious policies. Obviously, Trump supporters, nobody has a bigger blind spot for these kinds of things than Trump supporters. But ironically, people like this guy, anti-government radicals, they're justifiably paranoid about the kinds of things that the incoming Biden regime could do, and they're looking out for number one. They're out to protect their interests as loyalists to the white supremacist American project. But this is what's riling them up. This the presence of this Washington establishment that really binded them to Trump. Trump said he would drain the swamp, and obviously he's not done this, but he's created the illusion that he's done this, because whatever he says, tens of millions automatically believe without thinking. And
no verification.
Yeah, and these Trump supporters call it the deep state. But this is a sign of their false consciousness. We call it the capitalist state. There's always this revolving door, always this corruption, always this reality of war crimes that have not and will not be rectified, will not be punished until an anti-imperialist revolution happens. So this is the thing we're facing, not the deep state, the capitalist state. It'll be it, and obviously Trump's incoming corrupt regime will be on the other side of the coin of Trump's administration.
Biden's incoming regime.
Yeah.
That's good sometimes to see that happens to a young man occasionally too. But yeah, everybody misspeaks now and again.
Well, I said, but I thought I said Biden's incoming.
You said Trump's incoming regime or an incoming administration, whatever the word you use. I prefer regime.
Oh, so I guess I misheard myself.
Yeah, that's all right. You can go back and look at the tape and verify for yourself, because that's what we ought to all be doing, which is the real lesson here. Everybody should learn to verify. I'm surprised they don't teach this kind of thing in grade school, seriously. But they don't teach to think in grade school or in high school or in college, for that matter. Very selective ways of thinking in college, but nothing, and they just don't teach people how to think. But yeah, I mean, it's quite amazing. And the next topic we've got up leads naturally from this topic. That's why I put it that way. This is from an article by Rainer Shea, and it is titled Biden's Coming Economic Reign of Terror. Take it away.
I've been looking at the policies that Biden and his team want to enact, and it's clear that Biden is going to expand the process of neoliberal exploitation that's been being carried out by the U.S. ruling class and its proxies throughout the whole neoliberal era, and really well before the neoliberal era, because the neoliberal era has only been what's built upon the previous era of global corporate expansion and economic hitman. You might have heard of John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where he described how throughout the 20th century, after World War II, the U.S. expanded its economic reach and got its corporations to get all these business opportunities in the global South by either threatening or carrying out coup attempts against or waging outright regime change wars against all these countries that weren't entirely willing to capitulate to economic imperialism. And now all the countries within the periphery of the U.S. NATO empire are becoming overexploited more and more by this escalating process. It's been escalating especially throughout the COVID-19 era so far. This process of increased austerity and privatization and engineered wage cuts. Apparently the IMF is on its way to enacting these kinds of policies on seemingly unprecedented scale. 81 countries worldwide, this is how they've been exploiting the COVID-19 crisis. And now with Biden coming in, the threat will arguably increase, because Biden is going to return America to its multilateral style of imperialism that it had from during the Obama era, and he's going to bring back the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I believe. Remember the TPP? It was that big, scary so-called trade deal. Wasn't really about trade. It was about creating a system that totally streamlines corporate power grabs around the world, and that would have blown up the free internet, and that would have shipped out all these jobs, and that would have degraded so many environmental protections. And Trump abandoned the TPP not due to pressure from labor interests. And I believe that Biden is going to try to pursue the TPP and rebrand it as some kind of miraculously improved thing. But no matter how much he improves it, it's going to still fundamentally be a deal that would streamline corporate power grabs. And so as Biden tries to instate the TPP, he and his team are going to enact austerity. This is their plan to expand the austerity of the Trump era. Even though Biden will undo some of Trump's regulations, even though he has a plan to carry out some executive orders on his first day that could have some positive impacts. Overall, he's going to further U.S. austerity, and he's not going to propose laws that really challenge corporate power. And he's going to enter into the TPP, and he's going to try to help facilitate the IMF's 81 country-wide austerity campaign by carrying out Obama-style coups in Latin America. You might have seen the Mint Press News article that observed how Biden's team, it's been reported, wants to return to the Obama campaign, the campaign that Obama's administration did, where they were supposedly fighting corruption throughout Latin America. This was supposedly what it was about, but it really led to a coup in 2016 in Brazil that paved the way for Bolsonaro.
Yeah, that's that sounds exactly like what I've been reading, not only in your article but in many others. There's really big news, which I'm going to that I just came across today, because this just happened. It was actually, the treaty was signed on Friday. The Chinese, along with 14 other countries in the Asian Pacific Rim, including, I'll be reading them off, but when we get down to that topic 4, I believe it is. Yeah, Asia Pacific trade deal is a big win for China and a blow for U.S. American. U.S. America first has in fact put America last on the world stage, and this article, which I believe it's from RT, but it also points out that this really fucks Biden, because it's pretty obvious that Biden was going to try to revive TPP, as you suggest. And this puts the kibosh on that, because these all of these countries, the 14 other countries besides China, were to have been in the TPP, and they were powerfully pissed off when Trump walked away from TPP. And, you know, instead, it looks like they turned to China. And this deal from China is much better for them in all kinds of ways. I'm not going to get into the details because I'll be getting into it on topic 4. But yeah, Biden's fucked on that front. He's pretty much fucked out of Asia. I mean, I don't, at this point, with countries like Japan, Australia, New Zealand joining this new treaty along with China, you know, I think they may invite the United States to join. Who knows? But of course, the United States wouldn't join this treaty because it's actually a fair trade treaty, as opposed to what the American empire wants. So, yeah, good job, Rainer. All right, on to topic number. Unless you had something else to add, don't want to step on your feet, but real versus government 2020 election turnout figures. Figures don't lie, but liars sure can figure. That's the category this comes under. And who put Biden over the top? And this comes from an article from my favorite, my all-time favorite Marxist economist. And his name is, let me see if I can get it here. Just, let's see. Oh, wrong one. Where the hell did it go now? Hold on a sec. Let's see. Oh no, I hope I haven't gotten rid of it or destroyed it or something. I may have to, you know what, we may have to skip this for the time being, because I cannot find the article from which I was going to. Somehow it's not up on my browser anymore. I must have accidentally clicked, and it would take too much time right now. So let's move on to the next topic, and I'll see if I can come back to this topic in just a while. And the next topic is the one we were just talking about. Asia-Pacific trade deal is a big win for China and a blow for U.S. America First has, in fact, put America last on the world stage. And this thing really fucks Biden, which I particularly enjoy. So, yeah, this comes on the heels of the of last week's annual meeting of SCO, of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which also had some big news, which I will be mentioning a little bit later on. But this was a, as I described before, 15 countries in all, and it kind of replaces or displaces the TPP. These are the who's who of Asia Pacific countries. The deal is called the RCEP Free Trade Agreement, and it creates a massive trading bloc in Asia that America, through its insular policies, will play no part in. The author here says. The author is Tom Foudy, a British writer and analyst of politics and international relations with a primary focus on East Asia. And this news comes from RT. I actually downloaded some other articles. The Greenville Post had an article from Moon of Alabama, who I've mentioned a few times before. And it's also on this, and basically just gloating about how America fucked itself, or Trump fucked America, or whatever. But this is going to be the RCEP, by the way, is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and so it's acronymed RCEP, and came after a summit of these 15 nations. The nations include Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, as well as their trade partners, Australia, China, Japan, and New Zealand, and South Korea. So this is this trade bloc will have 1/3 of the population of the globe, and it will have 1/3 of the global GDP. So it's an enormous trade bloc, something that the Obama-Biden regime were watering at the mouth over. U.S. labor hated it. Working class organizations all over the country hated it because they saw it as as bringing a lot of competition in that would lower their wages. And I'm sure that that was one of the calculations of the capitalist ruling class when they went after this. One of the very few promises to the working class that Trump made in 2016 that he actually kept, actually the first day of his administration, his regime was to dump the TPP. And labor breathed a sigh of relief after that. And now the Biden regime has been talking about trying to revive TPP, but it's pretty unlikely now because this trade deal is better. Now, these 14 countries, minus China, may try to make separate agreements with the Americans. China has already made a separate agreement with the Americans last year. This economic partnership will eliminate 90% of tariffs, so greatly eliminate trade barriers, trade wars, and so forth. And of course, I mean, it's going to focus Asia on Asia. That's an incredible thing right there. I mean, it's going to focus Asia away from the American empire. Those countries that have been the closest imperialist partners to America, like Australia, Japan, South Korea, I'm sure New Zealand. This kind of drags them away from that to a certain extent. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But to me, this is enormous news. We should be rejoicing at this news. One thing that was pointed out in the article by the Greenville Post was that the I'm losing my point here. Anyway, this is really, really big news, and I think that it spells even more great things for the Chinese people, great things for the Chinese economy. So what are your thoughts, Rainer?
Wow. So it sounds like because this alternative route has become so viable, it seems like it was made viable by the Trump era, by Trump's willing to act in a way that was adjacent with labor.
Yeah.
He rejected the TPP, it seems like, because of his protectionist brand of nationalism.
Exactly.
And this is, wow, this is big news because it shows how the Trump era did irrevocable damage to U.S. hegemony, and that's not even Joe Biden will be able to reverse. So, wow, this is bringing me joy. Though
me too.
I don't know how much of an effect this will have on the material conditions, aside from having Americans and the people of all these other countries dodge the bullet of the TPP. I mean, even though these countries like Australia and Japan will now be part of this Asia-Pacific trade deal, which might improve conditions in some ways and will be an alternative to the TPP. These countries will still be within the periphery of the global neoliberal order, and Washington will continue to get these countries to carry out military buildup. which Australia is doing especially. And there's going to be this NATO 2030 program, which is, I think, done seemingly in reaction to stuff like this, wild cards like this, where Trump has come in and disabled their ability to return to the TPP, return to the TPP in these countries. They're going to institute NATO 2030 and absorb Australia and New Zealand and Japan and South Korea into NATO directly, and will then have greater ability to get these countries to carry out military buildup. And NATO 2030 will also make these countries more politically controlled by NATO, whatever this should mean. So their economies and their political systems will become more monolithic in the favor of NATO, and by extension the United States. So we can see why NATO 2030 is important to the imperialists.
Yeah.
And in this next decade, I mean, it seems like it's going to be more of what we've been seeing, struggles between the rising economic power of China, because the more China rises, the more practical it becomes for all these countries to sign on to trade agreements with it. And the U.S. is going to try to strike back by carrying out more military buildup and occupations and economic warfare, however much as possible. So perhaps Biden will react to him not getting his way with the TPP by ramping up warfare against China, ramping up the Cold War.
Exactly. Yeah, the other thing I'd wanted to mention is that the American media, the one article I read on this on this Asia Pacific deal mentioned that they did an extensive search for articles and stories about this in the Western press and the media, in the American billionaire-owned media, and found almost nothing. They mentioned even with the New York Times that they had one little blurb about it, and that was it. They didn't really obviously didn't want to touch it. The Wall Street Journal found an article today in the Wall Street Journal that says this is a real bad deal for all these countries except China, and this is going to turn out very bad for China. I mean, it was like nonsense that the guy was just thinking up out of his ass or something, and with no evidence, no argumentation, proof of anything of what the guy was saying. It was really an astoundingly poor article. When any geopolitical analyst could look at this and say, wow, this is a real coup for China. And it's not so bad for all the other countries in here as well. Take Japan, for instance. Japan has suffered from a stagnant economy since the 1990s. Japan, I mean, at one point in the early 90s, people thought the 21st century was going to be the century of Japan, you know, which obviously in retrospect is kind of funny that people would say that. Obviously, China, it's going to, you know, the 21st century is the century of China, the Chinese century. But yeah, anyway. So, anything else on that?
No.
But it's real big news, right? We're going to have to really drill down on this and keep an eye on it and look at all the different variables of it. Now, I mentioned the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's annual summit that happened last week. There's a lot of good stuff in there. That, you know, they focused on all the countries involved in SCO cooperating on COVID-19. SCO has got, like, I don't know exactly how many countries, but I think it's like 20 different countries in Asia that belong to Asia and Europe. I mean, if you consider that Russia is part of it, India is part of it, Pakistan. I mean, it's an economic organization that brings together a lot of people, almost all of Asia. And anyway, one of the joint communiques coming out of the summit was a condemnation of American imperialism, a condemnation of the sanctions that the United States was issuing against many of the countries that are involved in the SCO. Really scathing condemnation there, which I thought, yeah, that's good. It's very, very good. Yeah, and they came up with, there were some like confrontations there as well, like apparently the Hindu fascist Modi, Prime Minister of India, used his entire address to the SCO Summit to blast China and to blast President Xi. So there was that that confrontation. But they also, the SCO came up with a framework for conflict resolution, which they hope will further advance bringing China and India together on their border dispute, and hopefully avoid anything much worse than has already happened. And that it has already happened that there have been clashes between Indian forces and Chinese forces there on the border region that they share. I have reported on that in the past. So there you have it, the SCO Summit this year.
So it seems like this reflects the trend we were just talking about, how the countries in this region and ultimately in the broader Asia Pacific are increasingly setting themselves up against the economic interests of the United States, since the United States has nothing to offer them. I mean, aside from America's partners in imperialism, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, the countries in this region have nothing to gain really and everything to lose from capitulating to the United States. And this is the case for the majority of the countries of the world. This has always been the case for the majority of the countries in the world when it comes to imperialism. Most countries don't stand to gain from aligning with the United States. So what the United States can do is carry out all sorts of violence, like coercing these countries into doing business with the U.S. through sanctions, or assassinating defiant leaders, waging wars, doing occupations. And they're doing a version of this right now in Thailand, where there are these National Endowment for Democracy actors who are trying to co-opt the legitimate protest movements within Thailand, who are protesting against the Thai monarchy. So they're trying to take the opportunity and make sure that whatever government may come next will be loyal to the United States and won't be signing on to the Belt and Road Initiative, China's Belt and Road Initiative, like the Thai monarchy is.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I love that phrase from that one woman that's on the new Biden transition team about the coercive economic tactics or whatever it was. That's so descriptive. Anyway, onward to topic number 6. We're making good time tonight. Of course, we skipped a long one, but I did find that article, so we can go back to that. The thing about election results and the supposed record turnout, which is not a record. The ruling class braces, this is topic number 6, the ruling class braces for a revolutionary crisis. And this is another one by the oh so prolific Rainer Shea. Take it away, Rainer.
I've been looking at the academic studies and even intelligence studies that have been done in recent years that show how the United States is sure to experience great instability in the coming decade or so. You saw this article mentioned within my article from this Japanese researcher who has claimed in it a couple months ago that within 10 years the U.S. is going to split up, balkanize like the Soviet Union did, and man, that sounds kind of out there. I mean, the U.S. state seems so strong right now, and I honestly don't expect the United States to balkanize within the next 10 years. I think it'll remain unified until sometime later, until the S really hits the F, and there's great destabilizing factors like significant sea level rise, or an even more significant pandemic than COVID-19, or a really prolonged depression. But by 2030, all these things will be well on their way towards destabilizing the United States, and the Pentagon is preparing for this, as evidenced by a Pentagon report from that last year that said that the U.S. electricity network, the U.S. power grid, could collapse within the next 20 years. And they're saying that the Army needs to prepare for this, to carry out whatever humanitarian operations that they're able to, which realistically they won't save everyone. They'll neither have the material ability nor the mandate from the capitalist ruling class to save all these poor and desperate people who will become climate refugees in the coming years. So as this process continues of climate collapse and economic collapse, the ruling class is going to try to stop this from turning into a revolutionary movement. All that they have to do is stop all these poor and desperate people from being able to organize into a mass movement that has the militancy, equipment and training, and the organizational capacity, and the support from the ideological support from the broader population to be able to realistically take down the capitalist state. They want to sabotage the Marxist-Leninist movement and stop it from giving these dispossessed masses the tools to take matters into their own hands and overthrow the capitalist state. If they can stop this mass movement from gaining very much traction, then they'll win. the capitalist class will win, because we've seen how the capitalist class, within places like surrounding places like Gaza, places that are extremely poor and filled with unemployment and resource deprivation, are able to be kept under the control of the capitalist ruling class through intensive state repression and perpetual warfare against the population and against the parts of the population that are trying to rise up. So we could begin to see more dynamics in the coming years that resemble these kinds of extreme cases throughout history and throughout the contemporary world, where a large segment of the population is extremely poor, and a segment within that population is militantly rising up and trying to liberate themselves, and the oppressor state, the capitalist state, has the means to preserve the existing order through perpetual warfare against the oppressed facet. So basically, much of the United States could become a sacrifice zone, and the army could primarily use not for humanitarian means, but for fighting against the oppressed people who are trying to overthrow the state, because overthrowing the state is the only way we'll be able to defeat the forces that are keeping us in this increasingly desperate situation.
Okay, yeah. That's optimistic, and I share that optimism.
You think you interpret it as optimistic? I've given
well,
you this.
I interpret it as the revolutionary, the ruling class braces for a revolutionary crisis. I think what the crisis that they're looking towards is people rising up all around the world. That's what I see in the near future. Tell you the truth. Yeah, but ruling class braces for revolutionary crisis. I mean, they are. They do seem to be a bit frazzled in the last year and a half or two, especially in anticipation of bad things coming their way. So, anything else on that?
No.
Okay, good job there. The Chinese media slams big anti-China loser, quote unquote, big anti-China loser Pompeo, says his days as Secretary of State are nearly over. Topic number 7. And this, China, the Chinese media basically has been responding in the last week to a speech that Pompeo, of course, Secretary of State of the American Empire, the speech that he made last week, blasting China, especially the Chinese Communist Party, which has been his bugaboo in recent times. And he has embarked on a tour of several American allies in the Asia Pacific, which not really surprising, is it, when the news we just heard about the Asian Pacific trade deal. That not very surprising that they're trying to shore things up with their allies there, many of whom are now trade partners in this gigantic trade bloc that China was instrumental in putting together. So, basically his tour of the Asia Pacific is all about slamming China and trying to turn countries back against China. So, and the Chinese media, from what I could tell from this article, I don't read Chinese, so Mandarin or whatever. What's the other one? Mandarin and the two major languages in China. I don't read that, so I can't read it, but I have to take this this our author's this author's word for it. But this to me is this is indication of that the Chinese media is having a good time, having some sport with Pompeo, pointing out that his days are numbered, his days are nearly over. So, I mean, I really, I'm sure what he's going to be doing is making threats, economic coercion, as they call it, right, against Japan and Vietnam and Australia and New Zealand, South Korea. But, all of these countries, all they have to do is laugh it off, just like the Chinese media are doing, because Pompeo is not going to be there in a month and a half. So long, Mike Pompeo. Good riddance to you.
I wonder if Biden's Secretary of State will continue these same behaviors, since they hope to go even further than the Trump's administration has at economically strong-arming these countries and expanding U.S. economic interests worldwide. They want to bring back the TPP, but all these countries won't let them, from what you've told me. And I wonder if the current paradigm will continue. Maybe it'll continue in a more aesthetically subtle way. Like Pompeo has been pretty. He's really taken on Trump's bombastic rhetoric, and he's served as really an embarrassment to U.S. imperialism with his hyperbolic language and his really reality denying language at times. Like you saw in this last week, Pompeo made a speech. I don't know if it was the same speech, but he made a speech where he said that we expect to have a smooth transition towards the second term of the Trump administration. And Bolton said, "You're an embarrassment. You're embarrassing yourself with your delusional language."
Yeah, that wasn't a speech. That was a press conference where he was answering a question. One of the reporters asked him if there would be a smooth transition, and he said, yes, I anticipate a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. That was kind of funny, but no, so that wasn't the speech that I'm referring to. But yeah, I mean, obviously, these guys, I mean, they sit down in a strategy session and then they go out in public for the next couple of weeks, and they're really just carry somebody like Mike Pompeo. He's just carrying out the strategy that that his top advisors at the State Department are advising him, and obviously their strategy these days is all about attacking China, and in particular the Chinese Communist Party. BTW with your friend last week who raised this thing about the Indian Communist Party. Of course, I mean, there are like 25 different Indian Communist parties. So I don't know which Communist Party he was referring to, but there is a party called the Communist Party of India. And there's one called the Communist Party of India Marxist, and another one called Communist Party of India Marxist-Leninist, and it goes on and on. And none of these communist parties in India are anywhere near the size of the Chinese Communist Party. I looked all over the internet for any indication otherwise, just to dispel any bias on my part, because of course I have a bias. So I've got to be conscious of that and watch out for it, and try to disprove myself whenever confronted by something like this. But there was there was nothing out there. There are some very big communist parties in India. I mean, a couple of them, run states in India. So, provinces, basically what that is. They call it states, I think, like the United States does, but it's really not a state, it's a province. So, I mean, they're in the ruling party of some of the states of India. I think the Communist Party Marxist is a ruling party of a couple of the states in India. However, they're nothing like 94 million dues-paying members. So there's that. And let's see, I think that was everything I needed to say. If not, it'll come to me. So, anything else there? Rainer?
Oh, I shook my head.
Oh, no. I'm sorry, I couldn't see you because you're in the little tiny picture, not in the big picture. Okay, so let me get my bearings straight. That was topic number 7. Topic number 8 is the U.S. is a thief crying, "Stop thief," quote, "stop thief," unquote, and poses military threat to the world. Topic number 8. Let me see if I can find this to refresh my memory. My poor fucking memory is not what it once was. See if I can find, oh, here we go. Yeah, and this is from the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, or the Communist Party of China is the way they like to go. From their People's Daily newspaper, which is the main spokes, mouthpiece, let's call it that. That's an old kind of like a gangster term, but it's like they're the mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party. And it's kind of an interesting article, or I guess you'd say that this is a editorial. I think this is an editorial from November 13th. Which date was November 13th? Wasn't that the Friday, last Friday? Anyway, the article says the U.S. spread rumors at the United Nations once again during the general debate of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly, First Committee on Disarmament and International Security, the U.S. representative once again slandered China over COVID-19 panic, falsely claimed that Russia and China were constantly developing nuclear weapons, thus seriously threatening international peace and security. This is obviously the U.S. playing its old trick of a thief crying, "Stop thief!" If the U.S. respected the facts, it would correctly conclude that the U.S. itself is the #1 creator of unrest and chaos in global security and stability. And then it goes on to say, since Trump took office, the U.S. has wantonly pursued unilateralism under the banner of national security, ignored its own international commitments, and frequently broke its promise to seek self-deregulation. In the fields of arms control, the U.S. withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, dropped out of the Arms Trade Treaty, and adopted a nakedly pragmatic attitude towards multilateralism and bilateral arms control and the bilateral arms control treaty system. So pretty incredible all in all. The article goes on. You can find it just looking at the English language online, People's Daily, and you'll find it there. Once again, the article is, or the editorial, I mean, is titled, "The U.S. is a thief crying stop thief and poses military threat to the world." Now, it's long been my opinion, not only that the U.S. is the greatest threat to global security, but even further that the U.S., the American empire, is a threat to the future of humanity, threatens the future of humanity with nuclear holocaust, by its constant brinksmanship that it plays constantly against other countries, trying to strong arm other countries into doing its will, its bidding, kowtowing to it, giving in to it. And that's just the nuclear threat. That's not to mention the environmental threat, of which the United States, the American empire, based in the United States, is the greatest criminal of them all. It's the greatest contributor to greenhouse gases that threaten to increase global warming, already very bad. It is the greatest contributor to pollution, to, at some point, the Earth's going to have a breaking point on these environmental issues. And it's not just about this breaking point. It's not it's the breaking point, in my opinion. We don't really know when it is, but a lot of people have predicted that within the next decade we'll have reached the breaking point. I don't really know. I mean, there's different ways of looking at it, but whenever, sometime in the not too distant future, in your life, Rainer, maybe not my own, we're going to see these people go past the point of no return. And the United States is the greatest blockage to that. Withdrawing from UN climate treaties, as an example. And I mean, the UN climate treaties are pretty pathetic if you look at it, of what they really commit countries to do. But the United States won't even commit to those limited measures to try to mitigate the worst of climate damage, the worst of environmental damage, which is not just in the so-called climate crisis. I mean, it's the crisis of the sixth great species die-off, which, in my scientific opinion, is a even worse calamity that we're living through right now than global warming. You know, I mean, the disasters keep coming. The drive for short-term profits above all else, the profit motive, it's going to kill us all if we don't do something about it. And my slogan that I always use, I end a lot of what my diatribes on Facebook about it or here, is really quite simple. Socialist revolution is the only solution.
Right, right. You know, Biden will, of course, re-enter the UN climate treaty, but he's going to accelerate the crisis in other respects. He's, of course, going to not fundamentally challenge corporate power. This was something that he promised, according to this one article by the columnist David Sirota. You may know him.
I met him once. Yeah.
Oh.
Matter of fact, he had the job that I used to have before I had it, which was Ralph Nader's press secretary in 2008, in the 2008 presidential campaign. He had the job before I did. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
David Sirota has pointed out that Biden has made a big promise to his Wall Street donors that he won't propose legislation to really challenge corporate power. It seems like pretty much all he'll do is reverse the very worst of the deregulations, environmental deregulations that Trump put in place. He'll reverse those, he promises, on his first day. And that first day, it'll probably be by far the best day of Biden's presidency. From there, it'll be all downhill.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, that's basically what I mean. That Biden will barely correct the course. He'll follow along the path of Obama, which was one of accelerating the climate crisis while putting in place a few seemingly symbolic measures. I mean, Biden's promised reversal of the Trump deregulations will make some water cleaner. Will clean up some pollution, but Biden will follow in Obama's footsteps and continue to accelerate this whole process. And what will come after Biden, it's hard to imagine that this situation, our reality, gets more extreme every 4 years, every decade. I wonder what it'll look like a couple decades from now. I mean, the Pentagon has estimated what it will look like a couple decades from now. It's estimated that due to climate-related crises, much of the U.S. power grid will collapse, and the United States is the core of global imperialism, the country that's supposed to be the very most secure and peaceful. So who knows what the rest of the world will look like by then, and who knows we'll be able to survive. Who knows we'll be able to hold on to the comforts of modern life.
Yeah, really. It's frightening to me. I'm pretty sure I'll be dead by then. So, but not that that makes me any more want this to happen. And that's why I've dedicated so much of my life to instigating for, educating for, agitating for, organizing for socialist revolution, for a working class displacement and disenfranchisement and stealing back of all the ill-gotten wealth that the capitalist class has stolen from us just because of this. Because in the end, I mean, I don't know if that will improve my life any. I kind of suspect it will, just because that's been the way it's happened in every socialist revolution. Although, you know, unfortunately, socialist revolutions also tend to get a lot of blowback from the capitalist class and their toadies. And so the you know, there's usually a time of civil war after a socialist revolution. There's usually a time of deep divisions and strife and a shock to the economy and so forth. So I don't know. What I do know is that these insane criminals that we call the capitalist class are going to kill us all. They're going to kill our world. I mean, at least the human part of our world. This world will no longer be any good to live on for human beings if we allow these gruesome criminals to continue with their criminal activities, the kind of criminal activities that Biden and Trump and Obama and W. Bush and Bill Clinton and his wife represent. So anyway, onward to topic number 9. Americans want to ramp up imperialism to better themselves. Another article by Rainer Shea. Take it away, Rainer.
I'm looking at the choices that people are having to face, people who live within the United States, amid this time of uncertainty and unrest and social dysfunction and danger from both from COVID-19 and from escalating climate crises and from the rapidly growing poverty and unemployment. As society breaks down and there's this as there's this ongoing deterioration of the prosperity that the United States enjoyed a couple generations ago at the peak of U.S. imperial power, there's a choice that Americans have to make. Will you join the effort towards socialist revolution, or will you go in a reactionary direction? Will you take the dark path, where you try to vie for more of the benefits from U.S. imperialism? All the factions, aside from the revolutionary socialists, have taken this dark path. Even the social democrats have taken this path because the vision that the social democrats want isn't one of anti-imperialist revolution, but of a fortification of U.S. imperialism, where the U.S. empire continues its violent exploitation in many respects, while scaling back some of the wars potentially, and will strengthening the internal capitalist structure by expanding social welfare programs. And it's not like even these social welfare programs are ever even going to come into being in the United States, because as we've discussed many times, neoliberalism is the system that the capitalist ruling class is committed to. They will not allow somebody like AOC or Nina Turner to be elected president. They won't adopt these social democratic policies. All they want is a future of endless austerity and war. And since the majority of politically engaged Americans can't think outside the box of imperialism, all they can think to do is vie for more of the benefits from imperialism. These Trump voters vote for Trump and for Republicans because they see it as in their best interest. They see the Republican Party as presenting a way to fortify the nation, and in their minds, fortifying the American nation is what can be done to improve their material conditions. They want to fortify the capitalist, imperialist, colonial power structure rather than think outside the box and embrace a new kind of system. And the same is the case for these Democrats who want to continue neoliberalism, like the petty bourgeoisie and the labor aristocracy, and those who are a little bit lower than these tiers but are still culturally assimilated into the neoliberal ideological hegemony. All these political camps want the same thing, which is increased imperialist benefits for themselves. And the last thing that they want is a world where imperialism has been defeated and where the international proletariat can gain the power that it needs to survive this escalating climate crisis. So they're really thinking in a horrendously selfish way, though I don't know how much we can blame them, because when you've grown up in the United States, you're living in the matrix. You're living in a reality where everything, every social institution, all the education that you get, all your opportunities for gaining material benefits through jobs, they come from within this neoliberal pro-imperialist lens. And unless you're willing to make the big ideological leap towards revolutionary socialism, Marxism, Leninism, international solidarity with all these revolutions, many of which are, of course, demonized the hell out of as evil dictatorships that you should never support, like the DPRK in China and Cuba and Venezuela. All these places you're told to never align with because they're evil, they're enemies. What good could come from adopting their socialist ideology? So the common inclination, even for those who are being screwed over by neoliberal capitalism, is to stay within this ideological hegemony that rationalizes imperialism, and to consciously or unconsciously see imperialism as the only route to getting out of their current economic predicament.
Yeah, this is certainly a reaction by a minority of Americans. I don't know if I would say just Americans want to ramp up imperialism, because there's so much overwhelming statistical information that says that most Americans don't want to ramp up imperialism. Exactly the opposite. Americans want all these fucking wars to stop.
Obviously, I know this. I know most Americans are imperialism, but you see how even all these Trump supporters who have wanted to end the wars have nonetheless cheered for Trump, who's continued the wars and ramped up imperialism, and all that they've needed to be satisfied is to be told that Trump is doing some vague thing to draw down wars, bring back troops, even though this isn't even true, and even though most Democrats were probably opposed to war in general, they can be very easily made to want to continue these wars if a Democrat is doing it, and a lot of the time they just ignore it. And even the Social Democrats who really do want to end these wars, they would accept the vision of the Bernie Sanders wing, where imperialism is fortified, where the power structure is fortified, because imperialism isn't even synonymous with war. War is really just the reaction that the empire has been making to its recent process of collapse, and basically anybody who wants to continue the United States wants to continue imperialism. They want to continue the exploitation of native lands, the occupations, the perpetual violence that's waged against the victims of this settler colonial project. So I'm thinking on a macro scale, I'm thinking in a way that really delves into the root of what imperialism is. The reality is that most Americans are not willing to abandon, as of now, the American identity and the concept of the United States. They think it would be crazy to wage an anti-colonial proletarian revolution, which is where social fascism comes in. What I'm talking about when I decry these social democratic aspects of this pro-imperialist ideology is social fascism. I mean, Sanders has been complicit in many cases in the imperialist-led war against the Palestinian people. One of his bills has helped perpetuate the drone wars, and as you know, he's been complicit in many imperialist projects. So this is how the pro-imperialist ideological hegemony is perpetuated. It comes from all the mainstream wings in the United States. So we need to break out of it.
Well, we definitely need to break out of it. That's for sure. Sanders, I mean, there's no doubt that he is a dyed-in-the-wool imperialist, and that's the hallmark of European social democracy, which he identifies with, is imperialism with a happy face plastered on it. Imperialism with a welfare state, basically. That's his idea of socialism. We know that that's not socialism. It's certainly not the Marxist definition of socialism. That there are elements in the United States. There are some Americans who are gung-ho about ramping up imperialism, and that's what it's going to take right now. Biden knows that. Biden is getting prepared for that, as we've described in this discussion. Liberals, in general, are pro-imperialist. They always have been. They have never not been. Neocons, they are always pro-imperialist. They have never not been. If you take those two categories, that probably represents less than 30% of the American public. Those two categories, definitely. Social Democrats are so few that they don't even really appear on actual organized Social Democrats like the DSA or like the Bernie Sanders organizations. They're so statistically insignificant, they don't even appear on the radar. I mean, it's like, trying to track the Green Party vote tally in the last couple of weeks. I mean, they're so tiny, so small, they don't even appear in most polls. Even when they ask the question specifically, do you support Howie Hawkins, who was not only the nominee of the Green Party, he was also the nominee of the Socialist Party, an organization I believe you used to be affiliated with, and the nominee of Solidarity, which is a Trotskyite split from a split from a split from a split. So, I mean, he was nominated by 3 parties, and still he didn't appear. I mean, he just, statistically, they're nothing. And likewise with the Social Democrats, statistically, they're nothing. Statistically, people in the United States fall into 3 categories: Democrats, liberals; Republicans, which are of 2 types these days. They're the neocon Republicans and the paleocon nationalist Republicans of the Trump variety. And those 2 parties together, you look at the votes. I'll get into that. I think we'll wait until next week to talk about this. I found the article I wanted to go over, but I think I'll wait until next week. Actually, I think I might create a little slideshow with the with the charts that are in there, because it's so fascinating. But what you find is that among voters and non-voters in this current election, the party of the non-voter is, or was on Tuesday, November 3rd, and a few weeks prior to that, when people were sending in their ballots, the party of the non-voter is still the largest party in America. And neither the Democrats nor the Republicans got anything close to the number of votes as the party of the non-voter got. Those are all just facts. This was a record. That's true. This was a record in absolute number turnout. And as I've mentioned the last couple of weeks, that's not the way you measure voter turnout. You measure voter turnout by percentages. And as a percentage, this past election, even if you go by the VEP, which is the most conservative measure of voters, you got 62% turnout. And that is not a record, because in 1962 it was 62% turnout. So it was still not a record. And it was a big turnout, no doubt about that. However, those of us, me and others like me, in the party of the non-voter, we got a higher vote than either of those Democrats or Republicans. So I think we still won the election, as we have won since the end of the 60s. So anyway, yeah, the statistics you learn. Last week I dug up, in anticipation of this discussion, and I don't have it. I can't find it at the moment, but I dug up 4 recent polls that have been taken within the last year, and all 4 showed that a substantial majority of Americans are anti-war. And I dispute one thing with you, Rainer. I think in this day and age, and during the age of neoliberalism, war has been essential. It's been an essential part of the survival of the capitalist imperialist system.
Oh, haven't I said this in a recent article that America's economy is essentially a war economy?
A war economy, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, what Americans say about war is their I should say, I shouldn't say there because I'm an American too. That is our answer to imperialism. We're saying, oh, you need war for your evil criminal system to survive. Well, fuck you. We say no to war. You know what was astounding to me? Among active duty personnel and veterans, 61% were opposed to all the wars that the U.S. is involved in right now, and favored a withdrawal. Now, Trump, I reported last week that Trump had fired Esper, Secretary of War Esper, and the new guy that they brought in has said that they will be withdrawing forces from Afghanistan by Christmas. That's what they say, and that's what Trump is now saying. And Iraq. And to make the point more clear, a whole slew of top brass at the Pentagon were fired. And they were all the people who were foot dragging on this and refusing to obey the orders of the president. And you know what? I mean, Trump is obviously really a weak president, always has been, because any normal president would have just fired their asses right off the bat, 4 years ago, or almost 4 years ago. They wouldn't be waiting around until the end of their regime when they've lost the election to do all this firing. But the upshot is they're saying that they're going to bring soldiers home from Afghanistan by Christmas, and from Iraq not pretty soon thereafter.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I just think most Americans, they don't really know that America is an empire, but it kind of smells like it, and they're uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is there are layers to it. There's nuances, and though most Americans aren't really conscious of America's role as an empire, and they would probably be appalled if they were to get a proper education about it. They're conscious of America's role as the most powerful country on earth, and they seem to like this because the more economic power American corporations have around the world, the logic of neoliberalism and capitalist proletarian solidarity with capitalists. That's this ideology that tells them that their interests are tied in with the interests of the U.S. capitalist class.
Right.
This kind of logic makes it appealing for the U.S. to further its economic interests in places like Venezuela.
Right.
I mean,
let me interrupt for a second. I've got to step away for just a minute. Go on and continue what you're saying. I'll be back. Right.
So we're heading into this era where, though there will potentially be some decrease of U.S. military forces in places like Afghanistan and maybe Yemen, though we shouldn't trust Biden to end the war in Yemen. There's also going to be a great ramp up of U.S. imperialist machinations throughout Latin America. As we've discussed, Biden plans to carry out the very powerful style for carrying out coups that Obama pursued. He plans to do this in whatever Latin American country steps out of line in the coming years. And they might try to carry out a coup in Chile if Chile's new constitution turns out in a way that is detrimental to U.S. capitalist interests. They're almost definitely going to try to carry out a new coup in Bolivia. I mean, leaked emails recently revealed that some U.S. mercenaries are planning to carry out a big Bay of Pigs-esque invasion attempt of some sort within Bolivia. So we'll see what the hell happens there. And man, there's so many layers to imperialism. It's not just war. It's also the projects to overthrow the governments of countries which defy the United States, and the Cold War effort to try to militarily and economically strong arm China, and the sad reality of the power of U.S. imperialist propaganda is that most Americans, seemingly the vast majority of Americans, have become enamored with this anti-Chinese mythology, with this idea that China is carrying out genocide against the Uyghurs, and that China is acting as an evil dictatorship against its people. Stuff like this keeps most Americans tethered to the U.S. imperialist ideology, though it should be acknowledged that quite a lot of Americans, maybe around half, are apolitical in some way. They don't vote, and they don't seem to have strong enough of opinions to identify with the Republican or Democratic parties, though they can be pretty easily swayed in a certain direction when they start to get involved in politics. So what I'm pointing out is that there's some ingrained complexes within the American psyche that can cause Americans to easily be susceptible to imperialist propaganda, and part of this comes from a sense of economic self-interest. However much imperialist projects can actually improve their material conditions. And the ironic thing about this whole situation is that however much these poor Americans or economically disenfranchised of late Americans vie for the benefits of imperialism, their conditions are going to keep deteriorating. They're not going to get a windfall if Biden were to invade Venezuela or install a new coup regime in Bolivia, or carry out a coup against Chile. It's whatever benefits that they'll get from this will be illusory. There'll be a sense of nationalistic triumph, and at the same time, inequality will continue to increase. As we know, Biden's administration will continue to increase austerity. And as we know, he won't fundamentally challenge corporate power. So this is the sad situation that Americans find themselves in, whether or not they support imperialism. These people they seek to ramp up imperialism, and they seek to demonize China because they want more control, or they feel like this will give their nation more control, but they aren't really in control of their circumstances, as players in the global economy?
Well, I see a whole different picture when I look at Americans. There are these Americans, they are a minority, liberals and neocons mostly, who are gung-ho about imperialism and war, because they know that war is the only way to keep that. But the working class as a whole, on the whole, is not, I would contend. There are people, and I would contend also that those people are mostly in the aristocracy of labor, that is the most pampered part of labor that Lenin talked about. We've talked about the aristocracy of labor here on this show back when it was called Carson's Corner, and since it's been renamed Revolutionary Socialist Review. But I truly believe, and I just see overwhelming amounts of statistical data that I think proves this, as well as my own anecdotal experience. Working class people tend not to be that way, and tend not to think that way. And I mean, there are dumb people in the working class, just like there are dumb people in every class. Fuck, look at Trump. But the overwhelming majority of the working class people who belong to the party of the non-voter, they respond exactly the same when asked why they're non-voters. There are some lazy fucks who just say, oh, I really wanted to, but I just, I had to do my laundry that day. Or, yeah, there are some people like that, there's no doubt. But I would contend that the overwhelming majority of the non-voters in this country are not apathetic at all. They would love to be able to vote. And they respond when they're asked, why didn't you vote? The same way, because they say, because there was jack shit to vote for.
Makes
That's
sense.
what they all say. I mean, the polls, poll after poll, recent polls in the last couple of years, and polls from the 1960s, and polls from the 70s and 80s and 90s, and into the 2000s. People say the same thing all the time. I mean, you've seen the polls where people ask, do we need a third party? 60 to 70% of the people in America say we need a third party. What are they getting at? There's jack shit to vote for. That's pretty clear. I don't think that that's an apathetic response at all. I think that's a smartest response that I've heard about why they vote, or why people vote or not, or don't vote. The ones who vote, they give a lot more stupid answers than that, because that answer is exactly correct, because there is jack shit to vote for. Look at Trump and Biden, for fuck's sake. Talk about jack shit. That's the two biggest jack shits that have been come along down the pike since Hillary Clinton. And she was jack shit too, or is jack shit. You and I have a different view on this, I've got to say. And every time this kind of thing comes up, I'm a Marxist. And Marx tells me, and it's pretty clear in Marx's writings, if you read Capital volumes 1, 2, and 3, it rings out at you. Capitalists exploit and rob. They exploit the labor of the working class, and they rob us of the surplus value we create. There's no such thing as a windfall. There's never, ever been a windfall for any working class person anywhere in the world, and certainly not in greedy America where the capitalists are ultra greedy. They don't share their ill-gotten gains with anybody. When they steal it from another country, they keep it for themselves. They don't share it with the working class. That's just not what Marx says. Marx says exactly the opposite, that these fuckers steal from us. They rob from us. And I think instinctively in the gut, most working class people know that. Now, there are people who are bought off, like I've said. Lenin describes that. It's called the aristocracy of labor. And actually, I mean, our definition of aristocracy of labor has expanded quite a bit, because when Lenin was talking about it, he was really just talking about union bureaucrats and social democratic bureaucrats. That's all he was talking about when he was describing the aristocracy of labor. Now, we include certain highly skilled workers in that category. We highly paid workers, you know, like somebody's an IT worker who's part of the working class, obviously, because they're not management. They're wage workers basically, but they, you know, they're IT workers who make like $110,000, $120,000 a year. So, you know, they're obviously a bit more pampered than your average working class person. People like that, they tend to be liberals. Those statistics I'll get into next week, because we really don't have enough time this week. But those statistics that Michael Roberts marshals pretty well shows that to be true. So we'll get to that next week. Anyway, before we, you know, this is an ongoing discussion between you and I. So I'm sure we'll have it again. But in the meantime, I've only got 11 or 12 minutes left in this 2-hour segment. And I wanted to get to this last thing, which is pretty good news. We've had a lot of good news coming from communist countries. From socialist countries, more like, because none of these countries are actually communists. They have communist party governments. But communist Cuba develops coronavirus vaccines despite U.S. sanctions. This is some news that's just come out. Cuba has developed, and people who listen to this show will know that Cuba has one of the premier pharma industries in the world, which is amazing for a poor little country. I mean, they've got 10 million people in Cuba, and they're one of the poorest countries in Latin America, due in large part to the American sanctions and the American embargo, the American blockade, American sabotage, deliberate sabotage. But they have this amazing pharmaceutical industry that has developed some really stupendous treatments, drugs in the past. And they have developed now three coronavirus vaccines, two of which have been recognized or registered by the World Health Organization, WHO, you know, the one that Trump recently withdrew from. Insane fuck that he is. All three are in trials right now. Two of them are in late trials, which means basically that they'll be ready to roll out in the next couple of months. So if you look at it, you know, Cuba has developed more COVID-19 vaccines that look like they're very promising. All three, especially the two that that WHO has registered as vaccines, are in advanced stages of trials. The other one is in an earlier stage of trials. I think the two that have been recognized are already in stage 3 trials, which is, you know, the last step in trials before it goes to market, gets out. Cuba has developed more successful coronavirus vaccines than the entire United States of America has. If you think about it, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. I wonder why the U.S. has lagged behind to such an extent, especially since the U.S. is the country that's been hit the very hardest. Is it another symptom of the capitalist malaise? What I don't know if I'm using the word right, or the capitalist self-detriment that comes up during crises like these.
Yeah. I think that what it really comes down to is Cuba is not hampered by the profit motive. Cuba doesn't really give a fuck if it's profitable or not. That's not their concern. That's not what they're going for. What they're concerned with is, does it work for the health of the broad majority of their own people and of the 40 or 50 countries who turn to Cuba for pharmaceuticals. That's their concern. They're not vultures. The American companies, you know, so far right now it's Pfizer and what's the other? Moderna. Pfizer and Moderna have vaccines in trial right now. So in both those cases, those are for-profit capitalist vultures. They have to be concerned not only with whether it works or not, because obviously they're not going to make a profit off it if it doesn't work, if it kills people or makes people sick. And apparently, these things do have some pretty nasty side effects, the capitalist ones. But they also have to be concerned with whether they're going to be profitable and wildly profitable, whether they're going to pay for themselves plus make the stock holders big profits, big returns on their investment. So they're more constricted in what they have to come up with. I think that's a big part of it, personally, based on all of my knowledge, all of my research. That's what I think. So
makes sense. Was that the last topic?
Yes. As I said, we'll deal with the returns, the returns and who put Biden over the top and all that. This is a really good article. I hope you'll read it. I had included it in the list of articles I sent, so look for it. It's the one that Michael Roberts, WordPress. How does it go exactly? Let's see if I can find it here. Oh, I might not be able to find it at the moment. Looking through a haystack of shit here. Oh, here we go. Yeah, it's thenextrecession.wordpress.com. U.S. election, women, the young, the working class, the cities, and ethnic minorities get rid of Trump. That's the name of the actual name of the article. So, between now and next week, read it. I think you'll find it's really fascinating, and really a tour de force in marshaling, marshaling statistics and charts and so forth, that you can actually see what's going on with this election. It's pretty fascinating, actually. You can really see who voted for Biden, who voted for Trump, and who voted for the party of the non-voter, because he deals with all three, which is, that's the problem with most of these analyses. They act as though the party of the non-voter doesn't exist, or like we're not real human beings or something. So you get a skewed idea. If all you've been reading is that, you get the idea that, oh, Americans must love imperialism. They must be getting some benefit out of it or something, because that's the skewing that the capitalist media does. They won't talk about that embarrassing fact that the greatest number of people, greater than the Democrats who voted, greater than the Republicans who voted, didn't vote. They won't talk about that. They don't talk about, embarrassing shit. It's like that stupendous, huge news. You would think that would be splashed over the pages of all the media, the news about the China and the 14 other Asian countries entering a trade bloc. That's huge news, but it's absent from the American billionaire-owned mass media that some people mistakenly call mainstream media. There's nothing mainstream about it. There's nothing mainstream about a tiny, tiny, 1/10 of 1% of the people owning all the media in the country. That's not mainstream media. That's, far right capitalist owned media. Anyway, anything else there?
This is an argument I haven't considered before. The argument you make that relates to how so many people don't vote. A lot of these working class people, we can win them over. We just have to find them and prove ourselves to them.
Yeah.
My experiences with political debates have made me extremely cynical about how I'm able to trust other people, how much I should be willing to trust them. I feel like so many are ready and willing to betray me, to stab the communists in the back, to stab the global working class in the back.
A lot of them, some of them out there will do that. You got to be wary. You got to be stealthy. Try to always be stealthy. But just in life, you run into people that astound and surprise you. I remember talking one time when I lived in Iowa. There was a couple, a man and a woman. They were about my age, who owned the house we lived in. It was a gorgeous house, like really great, like 1960s modern, like futuristic architecture. It was right, literally 70 feet from the Mississippi River. It was beautiful. It's the most beautiful place I've ever in my life lived. And I'm talking to the guy. Usually we just dealt with the woman, and she was very nice, but very businesslike. But her husband, who didn't deal with any of the business shit, he had been a worker at Alcoa. Alcoa has an enormous plant there in Davenport, Iowa, or right north of Davenport, Iowa, which is where we lived. We lived in LeClaire, which is about 15 miles north of Davenport, right on the Mississippi. And I started talking to him, and after a while, I was just amazed at how we were just like falling in, love with each other politically. His politics were just so radical socialist politics, and I thought, wow, here's this old guy, worked at Alcoa, he's very typical of the kind of people that liberal asswipes expect to find in Iowa, a working class redneck, yeah, you'll really be surprised if you just open up to people. You don't have to tell everybody that you're a communist right away if that's what you are afraid of or whatever. Be stealth, work your way into it. Find out where they're at first. Be interested in them. Most people are really interested in people being interested in them. I certainly am. I think you probably are, so do that. But anyway, yeah, you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised at the people. I mean, I remember I had an experience when I was real young, and when I was like 25 years old, something like that, and I was running for city council on the Socialist Workers Party ticket in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I start talking. We're just shaking hands with people all day long and going door to door knocking and so forth. And I run into this woman, and it's an old woman, must have been in her 80s at least. She says, "Oh, it's the socialists. I'm so happy to see you." And she told the story. Her father was in the Socialist Party in the 1930s. And here's the real cool thing. Her grandfather was also a socialist. Her father was named Debs. She told me a story about how Debs was a socialist in the 1930s in Albuquerque, and he ran for city council and he won a seat on the city council. So, you really, it's surprising the people you run into when you're just out knocking door to door, if you're just open about it. And, most people aren't going to like attack you with a knife, although there are those nuts out there who might do that. So you do have to be weary, but yeah, people are better than we give them credit for. So oftentimes, sometimes they're worse than we ever feared. So just, it's like what they say about love. You got to be open to love. You'll end up getting hurt, but you'll also end up, you'll also end up hopefully finding love. So, that's the way of life. It takes a certain amount of risk. Just be careful about how you do your risk. Okay, is that it?
Yeah.
Good. Good show tonight. Thank you, Rainer. Thank you to all of our viewers and listeners. And until next week, this is Chris Driscoll and Rainer Shea signing off. Hasta la vista.